When I was first deciding on what to do first as a reading vlog, just kind of as an experiment for myself and an experiment for the channel, I was flip-flopping through a lot. But the reason I decided on literary criticism was because I knew it would be good to kind of build a foundation off of and kind of get to know one another. I think the first thing you think of is books written in that vein of criticizing other literary works. But I also wanted a book or two that would at least explain how to do that. You can only learn so much by being told what you should have caught and not being told how to catch it yourself. And for me, I mean, that's the reason I started reading in general as an adult, was because I realized I was an extremely passive audience member. So what better way to start reading vlogs by kind of getting into why I started reading in the first place. And it was to build my literary criticism. You know, I've gotten a lot better over the year that I've been reading, but yeah, I can always improve. So, the couple of books I'm starting with: How to Read a Book, The Classic Guide to Intelligent Reading by Mortimer J. Adler and Charles Van Doren. It was originally written in the 40s by Mortimer Adler, and then rewritten in the 70s with the help of Charles Van Doren. I mean, being as old as it is, I'm sure there are definitely going to be some things that culturally possibly don't make sense as much anymore. I really can't imagine there's all that much that would make it feel extremely dated. And the second one is Toni Morrison, Playing in the Dark. Ooh, that's a glare. Can I hold it? There we go. Playing in the Dark. Whiteness and the Literary Imagination. I've never read Toni Morrison, despite her being an extraordinarily prolific feminist author and a black author. How to Read a Book is more on how to do it yourself, and then Toni Morrison was more for the purpose of, you know, she had done it, and through a different perspective that I could ever give. She talks about Hemingway and Mark Twain using black authors for their own benefit. I think that one is a more traditional definition of literary criticism. I'm going to see how I get with these two books, how they blend together, and where they leave me wanting more, and we'll decide on the third book then. Let's go ahead and get on to How to Read a Book. I'm going to probably read the first, it's broken into 3 parts, I believe. So I'm going to read the preface and the first part. Come back and check in and see where we are from there. I really enjoyed this. I did borrow this from the library, and then when I was flipping through it, I got extremely excited and bought it from the used bookstore. But it seemed like the kind of book I was going to want to destroy and write all over it, and I'm very glad I did. I think he was saying it more in a scholastic sense of reading versus listening. Listening to a teacher, you're able to ask questions and kind of further your understanding that way, whereas reading a book, you can't do that. You ask the book questions, and the only way to get a further answer is by better understanding the text. He's like, if you don't understand something, or if you come across an especially challenging book, for him, the better option, rather than giving up or just asking someone for help, is to just keep reading it. His point is to read as much as you can, whether you read all of it or a chapter or a few pages. You get something that you understand and you hold on to that for dear life, and when you restart, you at least have a point of reference of where you're going. And so you can kind of build up and work backwards from there. And in that, you're able to get more out of the text. I get it. That's fair. I think it's a really good theory. He thinks that that's the better way to experience like Shakespeare in high school, rather than going through a scene and stanzas and breaking it down. He believes that you should be reading Shakespeare all the way through, having those tiny points of interest that you get, and then you go through it again. and you go through it with more context. And with that context, you're able to more focus on what you don't understand, or you're able to more focus on how you get there. He also does a fantastic job, in my opinion, of not talking down to you. The humanity he's addressing the reader with, it's not at all like you should have learned this in school. And the schools he's a little like the schools have failed you, but he's not placing blame. Your parents should have taught you sooner, or you should have paid more attention in school. If you had read all throughout school, this wouldn't have happened, and whatever. He's very gentle about it, and I really appreciate that. I think that was, oh my god, no. There was one point he's trying to, I tabbed it as a random color so I remember. He's trying to give an example of comprehension. To his point, he says, to make this clearer, let us take an example of something to read. Let us take the Declaration of Independence. You probably have a copy available. I can't say I do. But to take it further, he says, take it down and look at it. So not only does every home in the 70s have the Declaration of Independence, but you have it on your wall. That's awesome. That's fantastic. I'm getting a lot out of this, especially the fact that I thought I would be, like, myself skimming through the parts of fast reading and being like, whatever. But no, I'm enjoying it. It is dry. Don't get me wrong. It's dry and it's very, very dense. I think I'm going to take a break for the day. I believe it's supposed to snow tomorrow, so I might film a read with me as I annotate some more of this, and we'll see how far we get. We'll see. I'm enjoying it, at least. Alright, see you tomorrow. I'm done reading for today. That was an incredibly heavy chapter, and I really appreciate the fact that my window is so probably loud. Chapter 8 is incredibly sucky to read because he is again kind of going over the fact that he's like, you don't understand what they're saying. The next step is to then understand the context that they're trying to say it in. And if you understand the context, then you can kind of begin to get the forest out of the trees kind of thing. You can start to understand what they're trying to say. And then he goes on to say, we are not pretending this job is easy. We are only insisting that it is not an impossible one. He concludes the chapter with, this has been a hard chapter to write and probably a hard one to read. It was. And I'm done for the day. And then he also kind of goes on to be like, I understand if this is the last chapter you read from this book, so long as you take what you've read so far and implement that, then I think you'll be okay. In X-raying a book, he talks about being able to give a log line of a book, give a summary. What the book means in a unity is how he describes it. And that he's like, if you cannot successfully explain the thesis statement and then break down the outline, if you have read the book sufficient, but you still struggle to do this, this is not your fault. This is a failure of the author. So once again, instilling the reader with confidence. If you can break this down, then you're a winner. And if you can't, then you were probably set up for failure. So I think that's it. It was only the 2 chapters, so I mean, they're pretty tiring. Next is determining the author's message. So I'll return to this when no longer exhausted by how dry this was. Yeah. I'm tired. Hi. Now, I know what you're thinking. What the fuck happened to all your books? It's holding up the camera, because apparently that was faster than setting up a tripod. It's been like a week. It's been a minute. It's been a tiny minute. The good news is that I finished part 2 and I'm on to part 3. I kind of had a realization, because I remember when I was reading The Body Keeps the Score, where I started getting some kind of weird vibes from the author. I was like, I should look this guy up. I looked up Mr. Mortimer J. Adler and Charles Van Doren. First of all, I was like, Van Doren, this sounds really familiar. Why does this sound familiar? Van Doren? It feels like a lyric. Michael, Charles, Victor Van Doren. Charles Van Doren was a university teacher also famous for being a part of the game show scandal of the 60s, I think. Hold on. Hold, please. In the 50s, in the 1950s, where producers were helping the contestants and help feeding them the answers. So, Charles Van Doren, of cheating fame, helped revise the book. And Mortimer J. Adler was a philosopher professor, which it points to why every time he uses an example, his examples are the species of man. All these philosophy books that you've definitely have read. And I'm like, what? I didn't find anything that was explicitly controversial about them, of being like, these teachings are bullshit, alright, you know? So, yay for us. So I made a bit of a cheat sheet of what I need to cover if that happened in the rest of part 2. To be fair, it's not a lot. It was a slog to get through. I'll be so honest with that. It was a fucking slog. The most outdated part of the book is the fact that he constantly refers to the reader as he. Otherwise, this book desperately needs an abridged version. I understand why he goes on the tangents he does, and I understand the necessity for them, but holy fuck. It can turn a lot of people off, and I get that. And it's, I think, a good example of when he talks about, like, when you should be doing skim reading and when not. If you don't need to be told how to read a goddamn dictionary, then you can skim that part. But before we get there, the rest of part 2 kind of went on to my notes that I'm referencing. At the end of it, I talked about how he gives a lot of confidence to the reader of being like, you know, if you read this book, or if you finish the book and you don't understand the author's argument, or you don't understand what they're reading, and you feel like you've read it sufficiently, it's probably not your fault. And so then he goes on, kind of to cover his ass, essentially, to help the reader form the argument why you think the author has failed. It's very easy, as a reader, to assume a position of authority to the author. Because you're like, well, they're a published author. They wrote this book. They obviously did a bunch of research. He creates a list even, a very concise list that's appreciative, and also kind of why I'm like, bro, make an abridged version. Did they fail because they were ill-informed? Were they misinformed? Did they just not answer their argument? Like, did they start out with certain questions and at the end they didn't answer half of them? Or did they not answer them sufficiently enough with, like, proof and examples? When he's explaining how to use and how to read a dictionary, you know, it definitely feels like a e sequitur. It definitely feels like why? Just why? You know, I say who doesn't know how to read a dictionary, but I think it's probably more common for people not to know how to read an encyclopedia. So to have to take step 1 and then step 2 is fair for his argument. So that's pretty much it for my check-in. I am like halfway. There are definitely sections where I'm not tabbing almost at all because I'm like, bruh. But I think we're getting to the exciting part, because next is how to read imaginative literature. So we're getting into slightly more practical use outside of nonfiction, which is very exciting, genuinely. And then after that, I believe, was like plays and poems. And yeah, now that I've had a sufficient break, I think I'm ready to get back into this. Let's keep chomping away. Am I in chapter 14 or 16? Where am I? These last 2 chapters, am I even in focus? These last 2 chapters were beautiful. They were gorgeous. They were exactly the reason why I put up with the other 200 pages preceding this. So we're now into fiction. Imaginative literature, which is just his broad version, I think, of just saying fiction. He's saying part of the issue with fiction is that it's not as easy to say why you like something or why you don't. Whereas in nonfiction, it's just I agree or I don't agree, or, you know, the author made some weak arguments or they made good arguments. So he's trying to help you understand and break down why you might like a fiction book. He's saying it's less about reading it actively and more about reading it passionately. He wants you to completely immerse yourself into the world that you're reading. You want to open yourself up to the book as much as possible. You want to feel as deeply as possible and allow the author to kind of dictate and control your emotions towards these characters and the events. That's how you experience it to its fullest extent. Because if the author is failing to make you feel and sympathize for these characters, if you have sufficiently opened yourself up to the book, but you still feel removed, like, yes, then there you go. And he specifies that this is just like his theory. This is how he views it, is you like the story because you see yourself in one of the characters, and that whatever kind of justice is played out in the book, we would want it for ourselves. And what happens to the characters in the book, we would want that for ourselves. I think he's wrong in that part. Then you're only reading stories that are like, they all lived happily ever after and the bad guy went to jail. Woo! Which is fine. Maybe it's more the argument that if you don't know why you liked a book, it's probably just because it was satisfying and you wish, you know, life could be as satisfying. I'm just going to conclude that that part of the argument he had was not totally sufficient for me. But otherwise, he kind of touched on an example of, like, when sometimes people read War and Peace and they're immediately turned off because they're introduced to so many characters and you're like, I don't know who the fuck who's important. He was kind of saying, you're not supposed to. When you move into a new town, his argument, or you go to a new school, you don't know everyone. You're not expected and you're not going to remember everyone right off the bat. You need to be a part of the book to be able to do that. And so I wish there was more in the book that kind of gave these examples, I think, of how authors will use these literary techniques. I wish he did more of that in this very brief section, because he didn't at all. On to learning about how to read history and science and mathematics. Fun. Oh, and then philosophy. I am not a philosophy girl. Hi, a couple of things. For one, I think I'm almost done. I have 3 chapters left before I get to the appendix, and you know what? If he wanted me to read the appendix, he should have labeled it chapter 23 or whatever. Cause I'm good. I'm done. But first, I kind of so I reread the imaginative literature chapter because I continued to be dissatisfied. Reading the chapters after, he was addressing things that he didn't address in the imaginative literature, and there was no, like, connection of him being like, this qualifies for other books as well. Like, even though it's fiction it has, like, author bias. And that, I realized, wasn't touched on at all either. So I went back to read it, just to make sure, in his argument, I fully understood what the author was saying. He starts that imaginative literature chapter by saying, you know, so far in the book, we've only covered half the amount of books that people usually read, as in nonfiction versus fiction. And then he goes on to say how difficult imaginative literature is to explain, or like to dissect and analyze. But he doesn't analyze it in the slightest. And it's like, listen, it's called How to Read a Book, not How to Read Nonfiction and the Occasional Fiction. Sorry, sir, but I feel as if you're failing. And the fact that he is so crystal clear in the rest of the book and being like, this is the connection I want you to make, and he wasn't here, was disappointing. And then he also, again, reiterates that it's like you shouldn't criticize a book until you fully understand it. But, you know, what about literary books that are written to be made up for interpretation? Or even if you understand the book, like he does in nonfiction, saying you understand it, but where has the author failed? Let's cover those bases as figuring out where the author has failed. Or just acknowledging it. Of being like, yeah, this fiction is harder because analyzing beauty is different than analyzing truth or whatever. And like, you know, great quote. But, like, that's not enough. That just to say, like, this is really hard on to social science. Like, it's not, frankly. It might be, but it's not. To recover from Dragging Them Through the Mud, I did, when I reread it, I think he's implying to the layman, you know, when you finish a fiction book and you're dissatisfied, you might just not like it because you're not happy. Because it's not a happy ending. And he does say you need to address your own biases, and that you probably disliked the book because it didn't end the way you wanted it to end. But I feel like there's a but that he's missing there. I feel like that's only half a thought. That's the very beginning of a thought. Because, again, in the rest of the book, he's acknowledging if you don't understand a nonfiction, it might be the author's fault. And so it's the same thing here, where if you don't like a fiction book, it might be the author's fault that they're not following their own rules. I think he implies it. But implying it is not enough when for the rest of the book, he's explained things so thoroughly that it's like, I get it, shut up. So there's my disappointment. I think better explained now that I've sat on it and got more further context within the book of being like, why couldn't you have said this in the previous chapter? He did philosophy, so I get it. He's real passionate about nonfiction and philosophy and the real world and thinking about stuff. And Mr. Van Doren was real passionate about cheating on game shows and also being a professor. So maybe they just weren't well versed in fiction. But if you're gonna write a book called How to Read a Book, and you're gonna attempt to address multiple genres and types of books, you need to address the fact that you are not actually doing that. He's addressed that he's doing his best, but he doesn't mention the fact that he doesn't talk about fiction. Anyways, I barely tabbed in the slightest for the chapters after that. I have one tab for history. What did I tab? Oh, he says sometimes words have negative connotations, like the word communist, and you gotta be aware of that. And I was like, being a communist in the 70s, I wonder. Oh, I also definitely, I'm getting very annoyed with not, like, a single mention of any female existing ever in this book. It's all men. It's all men that have also written the books he's referencing. Does his appendix, motherfucker? Your appendix better have some ladies. Is that a lady? Is this a lady? No. Nope. Not a lady. Ooh, this is important. Ooh, this is important. So that's 1 page of all men that I'm aware of. 2 pages of all men. 3 pages. Oh, we have a Jane Austen. Dude, are you serious? A single female. Okay, so I gotta, that makes me so upset. Alright, I'm gonna sit with the fact that there is a single lady mentioned in this entire fucking book. That's a lot. I'm so disappointed. We're gonna finish this today. I'm gonna do some chores while I read the rest of the audiobook and kind of keep this open, ready for tabs, but I'm not expecting much. Yeah, okay. Bye. my guy has an entire section in the book about a section. It's part of a chapter being like, you know, talking about syntopical reading, and then he's like, you know, if you want to make it easy, there's this thing called a syntopicon. I was like, I've never heard of this. 1, how is it different than an encyclopedia? 2, I've never heard of this. My boy Mr. Adler, Mr. Mortimer J. Adler, he compiled the symptoticon? What is it called? Simpatico? Synto, what is it called? Was he trying to, like, push this? Was he trying to be like, hey everyone, there's this new thing, you all should read it. Should you read the Syntopicon? I keep wanting to say simpatico, and I don't know why. Should I read the Syntopicon before other great books? And someone's like, not really. If you do that, you're comparing the notes with Adler, rather than just being told what's neat about a book before reading it yourself. It's this one dude's opinion. That's literally, like, what he's been telling you not to do. He's been telling you not to take one person's opinion as fact. And then he's like, by the way, you should totally read this book. FYI. If you're doing research, just read my book. I probably don't talk about women in that one either. Bro. That pretty quickly. It ends there. The rest of it is appendix. It's not a book. I mean, I had a couple other notes. So he does acknowledge that science and philosophy are pretty inaccessible because of the language they use. It's like, thank you, Sophie. You need to know the sciences. You need to know, like, the basic knowledge. They don't write it for the layman. And he's right. And with that, if you are interested in the sciences, Immune is a great book. It's a textbook. It's a chonker, but it is extremely accessible. He wrote it with the mindset of writing it for a general person. He explains it in very easy ways. It's fantastic. FYI, if you are like, yeah, science is hard. And with the knowledge that there is generalized women mentioned in the book, and that's it, and then Jane Austen, that of course it's also missing any like black literature, any international literature in general. Like everything's like all the greats and the epics and Homer and all this bullshit, and it's like, I get it, but also there's other stuff. But international literature should have also been addressed. Of just, you know, there being, there's so many noises happening. This is why I don't film in the living room. International, of just being like reading cultures that you don't understand and that you're not a part of. Has these like really beautiful lines of being like, you go into a different world. It's sometimes you have to escape your own world. And then he ends the book with being like, yeah, fiction can't teach you anything, only nonfiction. It's like, whoa, fuck off. Starting off on a good, I'm not gonna say high. It wasn't a high, but he started off good. And then by the end was like, have you ever read a real book? Like, and then no, just kidding. I totally forgot the syntopical reading thing. No, actually, it's irrelevant. It's how to do thesis research. If you're writing a thesis, yeah. Then you can read part 4 of this book. Otherwise, don't. Just don't. Who cares? It is dated, but I wouldn't say that is to its extreme detriment. If you read this and find no issues, then you haven't read it correctly. To his argument, I would suggest this to someone who is trying to learn how to read closely. Because I have learned things from this. maybe less on like how to read analytically and more just building your confidence in knowing how to read analytically. Yeah, I think this book is more of a confidence builder with the caveat that you know how to skim read. Because if you don't, I mean, the book will tell you how, but you risk burning yourself out and putting this down and being like, never mind, it's not for me. When it, like, I think he works very hard to make it for you. I'm sitting somewhere between a 3.5 and a 4 star. I don't like quarter stars. I think they get too messy. Like, I want to say 3.5 because I'm leaving with a bad taste, but I have learned. And he has mostly answered his own question. And I'm inclined to believe that I expected too much of fiction writing rather than nonfiction. But with that, I immediately went to my library and put a hold on Stephen King on writing because I have read some passages from that I think will fill in the gaps that I wish How to Read a Book had. But in the meantime, Toni Morrison. It's a quick read. It's like 100 pages less than. And then I may touch base when I'm halfway or so. I don't know. Alright, ladies, gents, and other bents. I am very low energy today, but I finished these books, so we need to wrap this up. First things first is I read Stephen King on writing. Pretend I didn't. It's totally irrelevant. It's on writing, and it's all about writing, not reading. Which, it was a fine book, but not, whatever. Secondly, finished Toni Morrison Playing in the Dark. The whiteness and literary imagination. It was fantastic. I really, really enjoyed it. It said a lot. So how do we start? As a whole, the book is about American literature and how the American classics, specifically, used Black people for their literary gain and plot development and the character development of the white characters, essentially. In her mind, it basically comes down to when America was starting out and they wanted to define themselves and separate themselves from England, they had to create this bubble that would identify them. And in doing so, they identified what they weren't, which is everyone else in the country, which at the time were slaves, at least as far as American literature is concerned. She didn't mention anything of the indigenous people and defining Americans separate from that, but I think it holds the same merit. So slavery being the antithesis of freedom, which is why they, colonized a new country in the first place, that became the other. And that's a really important recurring theme in the book is the self versus other. So when the young country of America was defining themselves, they did it by defining what they weren't, which were slaves, and the unfree. And that became the other. That's what they were there for. They were there to contrast, to define what freedom wasn't. But, she came to this idea because she realized when she was reading these books, every time a Black character would show up, it had to do with the white character's, how does she say it? A significant moment of change in their life. They were being used as these tools, They weren't there for diversity or to meet a quota. They were there for a plot reason that helped benefit the main character. That was basically the first 2 parts of the book. And in the last chapter, she went on to give this, specific examples using Ernest Hemingway and a few of his works for how literature reinforces the division of Black characters in America, or in American literature. And so she lists 6 ways on how they do this: fetishization, the economy, metaphysical condensation of basic, like simplifying language to grunts and closing off any form of communication, essentially between 2 characters of different color. She uses his novel To Have and Have Not because it was intentionally political. Harry is the main character, and he represents the classic American hero. He's a man battling a government that wants to limit his freedom and his individuality, who's defined as free, brave, and moral. And so the black character on the boat with Harry doesn't get a name for the first 5 chapters. Hemingway writes it through Harry's perspective, and Harry always refers to him mentally as, you know, just a black slur. We eventually learn his name is Wellesley, and the fishing boat that they're on, he's basically, like, he's never hired. He's just kind of doing a trained response of just baiting the lines and letting it go, sleeping, reading the newspaper, baiting the lines, letting it go. Like, he has no personality. He is the antithesis of Harry. He's bound and fixed to this boat, and he's unfree. And she goes on to explain how he's used to contradict Harry, you know, trying to fight for his freedom and his individuality, where Wellesley barely has a name in the book, and he, in a way, stuck on this fishing boat because he doesn't do anything else. He barely even talks. I failed to find a way for me to explain it as in depth as she does without just regurgitating everything, because I haven't read the story myself. What is interesting is that she ends it by saying, you know, these characters and the things that these characters say and do were racist, but it is the characters that were doing this, not Hemingway. And she feels very strongly, she goes on to say there's in fact no strong evidence that she's seen that would have her think Hemingway is the one that believed these things. But he is responsible for them. But he is perpetrating these norms that shouldn't be there. That is just so linked into American literature. And she ends up by saying, this project was an effort to avert the critical gaze from the racial object to the racial subject, from the described and imagined to the describers and the imaginers, from the serving to the served. The way I see that is that it's less about what's in the book, it's less about Harry being racist, but the author perpetrating them and the readers accepting them, I think, essentially. It's very well worth the read. I think it's a little difficult to read, and not because of the language, but because of things she was referencing. You know, it's hard to fully wrap your head around a story and its themes and its characters when she's the one describing, like, when you have zero context as to what it is. Like with To Have and Have Not. And in the very beginning, Marie Cardinal's The Words to Say It. I've looked it up and it looks fantastic. Having to take everything secondhand is a little difficult, but well worth the read. Well worth the perspective and the theory that she gives there. It was pretty damn interesting, actually, for Toni Morrison to talk about how integral race is to, like, the fundamentals of America, like the Constitution, and then have Mr. Adler and Van Duren talk about speed reading and reading the Declaration of Independence. You know, talking about how you could read the first couple paragraphs and then all the rules you can skim because you kind of already know them, but in doing so, all the rules that you're skimming are probably exactly what Morrison is talking about, that is what actually is written because of the slaves in the country. A very interesting contrast. So, to summarize, Stephen King on writing. Read it if you're a writer or you like Stephen King. Otherwise, it's not for you. How to read a book is how to read a nonfiction book. It has zero literary theory. It's all literary criticism, which is fine, but if you want theory, you're not going to get it here. I still think it's wholly fucking rich for him to be like, when you're reading history, make sure you're getting from multiple points of views, and then have nothing to do with, you know, the race of literary imaginary authors and having no women. I'm sure the same goes for any authors that were not white, possibly. It is fairly dated, even though I thought it might not be. It is. He is a philosopher through and through, and to an extent that helps, but he really needed someone else other than famous game show cheater Charles Van Doren, I think. Toni Morrison, I would read it if you're interested at all in American literature. If you're interested in classics and read them critically, I would suggest this to white readers, as well as readers who find themselves mostly reading white authors, because it's very easy to, I think, misplace blame when reading classics, especially. Like I said before, this is my first Toni Morrison. I will absolutely be reading more. I definitely want to read some of her more feminist writing. But if you want to read more literary criticism and or theory, I would suggest, I have read Literary Theory for Beginners by Mary Clagues. It's dry, but not as fucking dry as Mr. Adler. That's for sure. She does try her best. It doesn't tell you how to implement what she's saying. She's more talking about the history. So I'm reading over my notes. Learning about literary theory means learning about the habits of your mind and having those habits disrupted. She also explains the concept of other versus self in a lot of detail. How the whiteness in America is unmarked because it's seen as self and not other. And how literature became important to belief systems because it helps create experiences, not just reflect ideology. If you like this or enjoyed the background noise while doing something else, I would appreciate a like. I already have the books for my next reading vlog on hold, and I'm very excited to dive into something slightly more fiction-based. Oh, and I didn't, 3.5 for being outdated and only half useful. 5 for being something that is very well worth reading again. And the irrelevant, I don't know, 3.5. It was fine. It was not a must read. Okay, bye. Have a good one, and I'll talk to you next time.